Hi, I'm John,
I'm Pete.
and this is the Fishstolian.
So, welcome back to the fourth and final Fishstolian. It's about 6 weeks now since we were down on the Froome, and quite a lot sort of happened between now and then. I'm just catching up with Pete in the car as we make our way down to our sort of last venue. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but Pete's just got back from fishing up in the Hebrides on South Uist, and sounds like a fantastic trip. Lots of bird life, lots of brown trout, the odd sea trout thrown into the mix. So I'm suspecting he'll be on form tonight. There's plenty of practice, and we're heading down into the sort of guts of Bristol, into the industrial heartland. I don't know if anyone listening has read the Luke Jennings book Blood Knots, but there's a fantastic chapter about fishing for pike at night in the East End, on the East End canals. So if you can kind of picture that, we're going to a similar scenario. We're going down into St Philip's and St Anne's, along near the feeder canal, which goes through all the major industrial estate down there, the big kind of wholesale fruit and veg merchant, loads of little kind of hidden away workshops, engineering workshops. It's the kind of place that you get taken by the craze with concrete boots and get chucked in the canal. So we're I don't know how you're feeling, Pete, but I've kind of a nice mixture of excitement and a little bit of kind of nervous trepidation.
Yeah, 100%. And I've reckoned the where I think we can park, which is the car park of a small business of some sort, commercial type property. And I'm hoping we get back in the car still there and hasn't been clamped. We got thrown off the place.
Yeah, almost anything could happen tonight.
Ooh, that is.
What we really hope will happen is that we don't suspect there's any brown trout down there. There might be, or there might be a slob trout.
Yeah, no, I think there could be.
Yep. Okay, there could be a brownie. But what we're hoping is to find a sea trout right in the middle of Bristol here. If you trawl the web for deeply enough, you will find the odd mention of sea trout being caught here by coarse anglers in the last sort of decade or so. It's certainly not a common species down here, but it has been done.
I think the my understanding though, John, is it's as we were told by an Irish host once when we were fishing over there, finding them was like finding rocking horse poo. I think we'll be really lucky.
Yeah, it does feel like a kind of needle in a haystack scenario, but hey, we're going to have some fun trying. Whether or not we get thrown out by a over-eager security guard, I don't know. But I don't think we're trespassing. Not once we're in the river, anyway.
No, I can't imagine anyone's bought the rights.
So we're nearly there. We'll fill you in on how the scene's looking when we get to the river. We've parked up in the car park of a sort of industrial estate. We've got a marine suppliers here. We've got a kind of kitchen and joinery. It's all looking sort of, pretty industrial. A few pickups behind us. And in front of us, we've got Netham Weir, which is kind of a V-shaped weir with a little sort of sluice running on the far side coming in. That's where all the water's most lively. And the tide's like right out, isn't it, Pete?
Yeah. I think low was about an hour ago,
Okay.
hour and a half.
So high tide is at 10:55. So we've come down just to kind of spec it out, get a feel for it. There's a little ladder down there so we can get down onto the weir. We'll put a picture up. It's sort of quite safe. The water's very low at the minute. Do you know what sort of level the tide is tonight, Pete?
The problem we've got is there's no tidal station this far up.
Okay.
So quite what time high tide will happen and quite how high it's going to be,
Okay.
we'll find out.
So we'll need to keep our eyes very carefully on the water levels because we don't want to get caught out here. But yeah, it's looking promising actually. There's a nice deep V section in between sort of the two arms of the weir here, which sort of carries on down into the tail. Then it shallows right up in the kind of the main river, but obviously that will all flood as the tide comes in. And there's some big spring tides last week, big moon, and the Avon below the Clifton Suspension Bridge was coming right up almost over the road. So it's been a good opportunity, even though we haven't had a lot of rain, for if there are any sea trout around, to get up here and come on up. And we're just hoping that, you know, some of them have got as far as this. Is this the first barrier? First proper barrier, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
So they're likely to be holding up here, waiting for, you know, either another really big tide or a bit of rain to come down and get the water sort of running quickly over this weir so they can run it.
John and I have been surveying the waters, overlooking the still water above the weir, with some spectacular movement of loads and loads of fry. I think there must be some sort of predator down there. However, we're going to be fishing below the weir, and we've been keeping a very close eye on the water where it's running off. We've just seen what was definitely a rise. We both saw it, both wondered if it was a diving duck, and nothing's ever come up, and that was 5 minutes ago. So there's a fish out there of some sort, not quite sure which. You know, tension builds. Evening's drawing in now. There's still no sign of the tide approaching us from below, but we're going to make a start anyway. It's about an hour and a half to go to high. We're going to climb over the fence, down the ladder, onto the top of the weir, and then make our way across the rocks.
So Pete's covering the water really nicely, casting round almost like the hands on a clock, making sure that he covers every little bit. We've got like a clear intermediate line, which means it's a line that sinks sort of quite slowly, but it'll get the flies down a bit. Obviously it's a lot deeper now than it was when we first got here, but it'll get the flies down a bit further towards where we think the fish are. Yeah, just waiting for that line to go solid and the rod to bend over. As we were tackling up, there was only one other habited vehicle in the car park. That was a very large 7 Series BMW with some rather exotic smelling smoke drifting out from the windows there. They just come to get a bit of peace and quiet in this industrial estate, and probably wondered what on earth we were getting up to, talking to a microphone and then donning waders. Anyway, they've disappeared now. There's another matte black Series 7 BMW that's come and done a couple of circuits of the car park, so I'm hoping we don't get unwittingly caught up in some nefarious activities, but you know, fingers crossed, we'll be all right.
Lights going quite fast now. All the street lights are on, and we're getting close to the point where you can't see colour anymore. You know, it's beginning to get to just black and white vision, which is traditionally when you should start casting for trying to catch sea trout. Fingers crossed. So the tide has turned. We saw it flowing over the top of the weir. The street lights were showing it just shimmering where it was. Very shallow little film of water was heading upstream over the weir, and then everything went still, and now it's turned and is incredibly quickly the level is dropping, and what started like the sound of the wind in the trees, really, in the leaves, has now become, it sounds like heavy rain, and that's the water all now starting to rush over the weir out again. So, you know, we could literally hear the tide change.
Yeah, and as we look up the light that the street light's casting across the pool, you can still see for the probably past half an hour we've been watching some fish which we think are mullet, just kind of moseying around a little shoal of them. They're still there, but I imagine they'll retreat now as the tide goes back out, retreat down the Avon. So what flies have we been using? Well, we've been using on the point fly, which is the one right at the end of the line, a fly that we've christened the Captain, that we've used in lots of different places, and it's caught us lots of different fish, sea trout and brown trout. And it's basically I suppose in the water it would look something like a tadpole, because it's got a kind of long flowing tail.
Yeah, or a leech.
Yeah, and would move in a similar way.
Or even a miller's thumb,
A little fish or
bullhead.
something. And then on what we call the dropper, which is just a little short section of line further up, about 6 inches, that comes off the main leader or the main bit line, we've got a very kind of silvery looking fly called a teal blue and silver, which is looks like a little tiny fish, imitates a little fry in the water. So we've seen some fry around tonight.
Yeah, we've seen a lot, haven't we?
And we've seen something crashing into them. I suspect it was a pike, but you never know. So hopefully, between those two flies, we've got it covered off. Never really worry too much about fly selection when I'm sea trout fishing, because I think it's, rather than them looking for something to eat, they're looking to something. They're snatching in a kind of defensive or predatory way. When something comes into their territory, they're just sort of lashing out at it. And I think the fly selection is probably not quite as important as when you're casting to a feeding trout, which can be incredibly selective. Sometimes just a few millimetres in the size of the fly means the difference between it taking it or not.
Yeah.
But
The captain you used on the point too, John, has got a bead head in. It's got a little metal bead.
That's right.
That gives it a lot of extra weight, and I just think we were trying to take it down a little.
Yeah.
So we're fishing, 6 inches under the surface rather than right on the top.
Yeah, combined with the intermediate line, then we're probably getting down maybe a foot or so below the surface. Yeah. It's amazing how sea trout can actually see a fly, though, isn't it? In the dark, and sometimes often the darker the better.
Yeah. In the pitch darkness, they can see something an inch long.
Yeah, or on rivers like the Till up in Northumberland, the smaller the better. They take little size 16 flies, which are maybe 10 millimetres long.
Yeah.
And then you think, how on earth does it see it in the pitch dark?
I know. Their eyesight must be extraordinary.
Yeah. I've got to say, this feels slightly insane. It's about midnight now. Yeah, if we were to get something, it'd be brilliant, but I'm not entirely convinced it's going to be this evening. Might have to come back during the day and try some other methods to see what's around, but it's definitely been really interesting having a look about, seeing this volume of water move around, and just getting familiar with this little section of the Avon.
So here we are, John, Sunday morning, early. The river's looking lovely, actually, with that warm coloration in the light, because it's so early.
Moorhen down there.
Oh, moorhen. The gulls are all stationed along the weir as last time. Right, so this morning I'm getting down and dirty. John is sticking with flies. He's going to do it properly. Just to give us some more options, I've got some maggots and I'm going to be trotting. Get down really deep, and it just opens up another line of attack. Really, still believe there could be some trout in here. It looks like there might be, John, but we'll find out shortly.
Yeah, so it's nice to see a decent amount of flowing water, because I was having a look online this morning, and some of the reservoirs, particularly the one that we fished a couple of times up in the Brackens called Tallymont, absolutely on its bones. There's virtually, it's 50% of its usual capacity. We desperately need some rain, so it's quite refreshing to be out. There's a little bit of a chill in the air this morning, in the middle of this kind of hot period, and there's a good flow here, particularly down the sluice gate, so the water's going to be really well oxygenated. If there are any fish in here, I think they're going to be in this pool, so let's tackle up and get to it. So, just decided to take a little break. I've come up onto the top of the weir, been swinging my flies across the tail of the pool, down the bottom there, and no interest, unfortunately, but I'm come up above Pete. Oh, and Pete's in. Cool, that was good timing. Now, what's that? Some little silver fish. Oh, and it's off. What was it, Pete? A little tiny bass. Fantastic. Oh, it just came off just as he was about to net it. So, okay, well, I think that counts as half. I was just going to say, well, even though we blanked here, but looks like we haven't. Well, technically, I guess we have, but it's a moral victory at least. But yeah, I was just reflecting as my flies were skirting across the port, being completely untouched by anything, about this whole project and, you know, why we got into it and kind of what it means to us and everything. It's, you know, it's been great fun, really. Spent this morning reading through the paper as I was waking up and drinking my cup of tea before coming out. And it's pretty gloomy stuff at the minute. And for me, it's just like a little sign of hope. You know, you can go to a river like the Trim or Snuff Mills. The amount of sewage that's pumped into those two is literally criminal. And yet these little beautiful creatures are surviving. It just gives me something to be hopeful for. And not sure they're in this particular pool. I was hoping there'd be a slob trout, which is a kind of a trout that will wander up and down from the salt water into the fresh water, not necessarily going out to sea, but just kind of moseying around trying to find food between the two. I thought possibly there might be a slob trout in here. And the reason we're here is a few years ago I read on one of the coarse fishing forums about someone who'd caught some sea trout here, and he'd posted that in 2007, and I think he was talking about several years before that. So, you know, we're looking about 20 years ago now. Lots changed since then, but if it could happen then, it could happen now. It's just not happening for us, I'm afraid. But going to go down and have a chat with Pete, congratulate him on his half a bass, and see if he can find any more in there. So I've come down just to congratulate Pete on his fish and get the inside on what's happening. Pete, that was amazing. Saw your rod bent over and you were in.
Yeah, sort of. I wouldn't say that's the biggest fish I've ever caught. Yeah, well, that was the second one. So the first one actually was a little bass. Interesting. I was wondering, you know, is this pool like part of the river, which occasionally becomes a bit salty?
Yeah.
Or is it sort of an extension of the sea that gets a bit of fresh water every now and then? And who knows from what I've caught there. So trotting maggots, trying to get them as near to the riverbed as possible. I've been feeding the swim. You know, in a pool looking as fishy as this, if something doesn't have a sniff at that mix, you know, there's something wrong. So two caught, see if we can find something bigger. And on the fly, you know, so far no interest, is it?
Oh yeah, no.
Still a bit surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess there's only one way to find out how salty the water is, but I don't quite fancy that, I've got to say. Well, floats under Pete. No, that wasn't a fish.
Yeah, I'm snagging up.
Yeah, Pete.
These big lumps of folders.
Yeah, there's a lot of snags down through here, and it's tricky trying to direct your float around them. But yeah, so that's two fish. Neither of them are trout, but lovely to see a bass. I wonder if it's a bit of a nursery up here. And I heard last week, or saw on Facebook, that a lure fishing angler had caught a nice bass in the docks. Looked like it was at least 2 pounds. They regularly fish down there for big perch, but this guy had hooked into a bass, which must have come in when they'd opened the lock gates up to let a pleasure craft in or out. Just sneaked through, and was now living in the docks. You get a similar thing down at Portishead in the marina, where fish come in when the lock gates open to let the boats out into the Severn, and there's all kinds of species living in the marina now. I think pretty much every sea species is in there. I heard that, I don't know if this happens now, but when they had sea fishing competitions, they'd keep the fish in tanks in the boats and then release them out into the marina when they came back in. I don't know how much truth there is, but there's certainly a lot of variety in terms of the species in the marina there. Not strictly the Avon, but not too far away. But it's a real fish soup, the docks, actually. There's some really big carp in there. You see them occasionally basking on a sunny day. I used to fish down on the docks when I was a kid, and when the Courage Brewery was still active down there, and you used to get quite a lot of fish sitting just by the outflow from the brewery, whether they were finding nutritious things to eat or just got a taste for Courage Best, I don't know. But quite often the fish that you catch then would have kind of sores on them. You know, they didn't look particularly well, but the bass that I saw today and the other fish I've seen being picked up down there all look fighting fit. They're really good. So rightly we worry about the sewage that's released into the Avon and its tributaries, but I think on the whole things have got better, much less industrial waste, and worth protecting, definitely.
So I've come down to a place called Bourton, which is on the junction of Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire, and I'm sat around a lovely wooden table in a beautiful cottage with a real fire roaring away. I've got a belly full of homemade stew, and I'm happy to be the guest of a friend of mine, Luke Kozac. I met Luke probably about 10 or 15 years ago when he came down to do a river survey of the little stream that I fished just outside of Bristol with the Wild Trout Trust. And we kind of struck up a friendship. Basically, Luke has got a kind of every fisherman's dream CV. He's well, Luke, you tell me about it. I think you started off in river restoration, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I did, and I mean, it goes way back to being a nipper. Really, I was always hanging around rivers and streams and fascinated by what was going on. And I remember going into the Woodford Valley with my mother and father and seeing these dark shapes bombing around under the water and just being absolutely enthralled by the whole thing. And just, yeah, ever since then, just had this inquisitive sort of nature of, about the whole life cycle of rivers and how they work and the things that live in them.
So your first sort of employed role in that area then was as a kind of river restoration consultant?
Well, it goes back further than that.
Okay.
In fact, yeah. I actually went to Lackham College of Agriculture, but I got a work placement on the River Test at Leckford, where I worked with Guy Robinson, the river keeper on the Leckford estate. Guy was a fantastic chap, and I worked with him and Neil and Rob on the Leckford estate as a young river keeper at 15 years old, and lived for sort of 4 or 5 days on my own. So I was living the life of Riley for a while, fishing and shooting, and then I drifted away for a long time, and lived in various places, Bath and Brighton, and had lots of fun. And this will echo for people out there, but I came back got to my late 20s and thought, well, what the hell is it that I want to do with myself? And sort of came out of a bit of a daze and thought, I need to do something serious,
Yeah.
I need to have some kind of life, or career. And so I became self-employed and just edged my way back into rivers again. So I got a chainsaw ticket. I made connections with local angling clubs, Salisbury District, and I got a bit of work here and there. And then I met Dominic Longley, who is a great friend of mine, and in the end worked for a couple of river restoration contractors, and then decided to go it alone by myself. And I just got a bunch of work for local fishing clubs doing river restoration. Then I got a gig for the Wild Trout Trust with Sean and the gang, and they were stupid enough to let me go out and speak to the likes of fishing clubs like you on the Little Avon and stuff like that. And so that was just brilliant. Yeah. Eventually, after 10 years of contracting, my body basically started to ache. I had enough of banging posts into rivers and chainsawing, and my knee got a bit sore and blah, blah, blah. Excuses, eh? And I had a young family, and it was like I needed something a bit more reliable, and something to take me to the future. So I started work at the Environment Agency as a fisheries officer some 3.5, 4 years ago now. And since then, I've morphed from fisheries officer into a projects officer. So I'm now an environmental project manager, and I work across the Hampshire, Avon, Dorset, and Somerset. So the whole of the Wessex region. At the moment, working with government funding and working in partnership with NGOs and other public bodies, and delivering projects and doing good where we can in river catchments.
What are your thoughts around kind of more urban rivers? Rivers like the ones we're looking at in Bristol. What's the future look like for those? I'm just thinking, because going up through the Froome where we were on the last episode of the Fishstolian, it's just crying out for various river works, taking out the weirs. I've said to Pete, who is on the podcast with me, if the weirs came out of here and you could get on top of the sewage, the Bristol Froome would be a class river. But there's half a dozen big weirs that kind of interfere with all of that, and I just wonder how what you're thinking is around these rivers that have a bit more of a hard time and don't necessarily have the investment, the private investment in them.
Yeah, it's complex. It's expensive and increasingly more expensive in these times as well. And it needs a multitude of different organisations and pressure and finance to make that happen. The Bristol area has been historically, the river catchments in Bristol have been, the Bristol Avon has been historically modified over hundreds of years. And you're not just talking about removing impoundments. If you did that, then you would need to also improve the habitat on those streams to support migratory fish or brown trout or coarse fish or whatever's present in those catchments. So you would need an integrated approach, and you would need multiple agencies and organisations to do that. And there's no secret about it. River restoration is expensive. It's really expensive, and that is why organisations like the Wild Trout Trust, I think, are so valuable, because the guys that work for them understand some of the ways that you can enhance habitat, quickly and on small budgets. They work miracles. I mean, you've had visits from Wild Trout Trust and others in the past. Those reports are like gold dust. And they can really be a call to arms sometimes, and inspirational for the people that are at the other end of them. So, but with regards to you've got rivers like the Trim, the Chew, the Mells, the Bye Brook. They all support trout, and they all have sections of good habitat. But it would be a question of okay, so if you removed some of those big impoundments further down, lower down on the main river, are those fish then going to move up and end up somewhere where there's just inappropriate habitat and, there's pollution from industry, blah, blah, blah. Are they going to be a threat? So that's why you look at it as a whole. It's not just, you can't just go around knocking holes in weirs and pulling weirs down and expect there to be a result overnight. It ain't going to happen. So it's an integrated approach, and it takes years and years and years, and it's frustrating. I'll be the first one. How many times, John, do you go out and you look at a river and you think, oh, just all I need is a road breaker and 5 gallons of petrol, and I'll be able to sort this one out. It's not that easy. There are riparian owners, there are sewage treatment works, there are footpaths, local authorities who who have sort of, they have priorities, and some impoundments keep water levels up and keep water around people's properties. You've then got to negotiate with them. You get one stick in the mud who doesn't like it, and the whole plan's wrecked. So it is a complicated thing to do, but the only way you can do it is by good planning, good investment, good funding, which we know is short on the ground. And not soon, by the sounds of it, not to get much better very soon. So it's, I think, yes, I work for the Environment Agency, but it's not a but. I'm extremely proud to work for the Environment Agency, and I'm proud of my colleagues, and I'm proud of what we do. The EA doesn't always get it right. We've come under a lot of pressure recently, particularly around water quality. And in my personal opinion, rightly so. I would completely understand those people who've been critical of the Environment Agency, but my job as an Environment Agency officer is I've signed up to that responsible officer role, and no matter what comes at us, I have to go into work every day and do the best I can. And that's exactly what I bloody do. And so I'm not saying that those people who criticise the EA are wrong. I think we need them. I think there's space for everyone. But we are under significant pressure and challenges because of the amount of funding that is coming from government.
And I think anglers on the whole would recognise that now. The evidence of that is really obvious. And interesting what you're saying about keeping a bit of hope alive. Because you've got organisations like Trout and the Trim. We talked about them before. Who've moved out of the Trim. 25, 28 tons of litter of historical,
incredible.
And you think that's just. I mean, it's a great thing to do for a start. Visually, it's a great thing to do. Makes the river look a lot better. But just to get rid of those decomposing plastics. And I think there's a lot to be said for just doing what you can. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
There may be massive structures that impound the migration of the fish that you can't do anything about. But you can remove bikes, and I say this as someone who's only done a couple of those. Fortunately, I'm still working and not retired. I'd love to do more, but they've removing a bike, removing a shopping trolley, all of that goes to make that environment a more precious place for the people who use it. And the more people who have that connection with the river, the higher a priority, hopefully, into the future it becomes, So I think sometimes it does feel futile, doesn't it? It does feel like hopeless.
It does.
But actually, you can't give up. Just do what you can. Get in there, turn stones over, report, check for bugs, report for pollution incidents, get rubbish out. Love your river in the state that it's at. Because if you take the Trim, for instance, parts of it are grey with runoff from the roads or from sewage overflows from the CFOs. But there are still trout living in there. There are still case and uncased caddisflies in there.
Clinging on.
So, it's not, we shouldn't give up. There's still stuff to be hopeful around, I think.
My motto is fight your corner, do the bit nearest to you, Look after the river nearest to you. You never lose hope, and do your bit. I mean, down the road in Wincanton, in the River Cale, you've got the Catch organisation, Matt and Gary, and they've just done tremendous stuff for the River Cale in Wincanton, and they've done exactly what you said and inspired so many people locally. They've cleared out rubbish from the river. They've had Riverfly Days. The Environment Agency have worked with them and funded them. We've got Jim, one of our fisheries officers, been down and restocked the river with coarse fish. It's been fantastic, and just to see children in a plastic tub looking at river flies, they cannot believe it. They're like, what the hell is that? What are they? And it's inspiring, and those are the things. They are the people that we need to step up next when we're all old and creaky and falling off our perches. We need them. So I totally agree.
Yep.
Get involved with your communities, get people in the river, show people the river, get people access to the river, clean them up, whatever you can. It's all beneficial.
So I think when we were first fishing, you're slightly younger than me, but back in the 70s, when I was sort of thinking about it, I mean, I'd never actually got to grips with it then. It was only later in life, but I had that same fascination you were talking about with fish and rivers.
Yeah.
But it was one of the sort of default activities for kids in those days. I mean, loads of kids fish. Pete, the other half of Fishstolian, he grew up doing that. That's what they did as teenagers. They strapped their rods, their crossbars, and they went off fishing on the Tyne. Whereas these days, that's not the case. So the opportunities to connect kids with their local river becomes even more important because it's not naturally necessarily their playground now. And the stuff the Environment Agency does around that, and there's projects like Eels in the Classroom, isn't there? And that's really great for making that connection. So think about initially river restoration, latterly project manager,
Yes.
and then in between that you were actually a fisheries officer.
Yes.
Just tell us a little bit about what would a day look like for a fisheries officer?
Well, fisheries. There are two elements to fisheries officers. Some of them are out on the ground and they're dealing with incidents, poaching, unlicensed fishing, that kind of thing. So there's the enforcement side to it, and then there's a kind of public engagement liaison side. And then there's kind of a bit, and there are fisheries officers who sort of switch between both. But there's a sort of enforcement side, and then there's the office-based side.
Yeah.
Both of them interlink and cross over. So but we have, the Environment Agency has enforcement officers who obviously go out and they go out and make sure that people have got their rod licenses. They might go and do checks on fisheries, for permits, to see if they've got stocking permits. And they also play a crucial role with engaging with angling clubs. You have things like diseases which can spread through coarse fisheries and trout fisheries. So again, they would be the liaison between the fishery and our labs at the Environment Agency. So sometimes we might go and analyse certain fish that are diseased, or we might go out and restock, if people have lost fish. So there are multiple. It might be answering emails, in an office, or responding to, horrendous fish kills. Yeah. So it's an extremely varied job. Yeah. But a vital one. And the fisheries officers are really well trained, and they are all. Most of them are fishermen, and they're passionate, just like me and you.
Yeah, I only wish we had more of them. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think last time I had my license checked was probably about 20 years ago. And I would dearly love to have my license checked more often. Yeah, because I know that those guys are passionate about what they're doing, and it'd be good to know that they were around. And then hopefully, a time will come where our rivers become more of a priority and we start to see that again. But, in the meantime, as we've been saying, we need to step up, I think, and kind of start being the eyes and ears.
It's a good point. I know, I can't comment on numbers of Environment Agency officers. I know that there are less now. I can't really comment personally on what plans are, whether they're going to increase or not. I don't know, in all honesty, John. But I do know that there's some kickback, and rightly so. Like you say, we need to protect our rivers and we need more people out looking after them. That's for sure. But I think one of the things I wanted to mention was the role of citizen science.
Yes.
Which we talked about, and that is going to play an increasingly more important role, because we are starting to work collaboratively with people who are doing citizen science, riverfly partnerships, not just fishing clubs, wildlife trusts, friends of rivers, local community groups who might not necessarily be fishermen, but interested in protecting their rivers, aquatic invertebrates. So yeah.
Brilliant.
I think there's there are movements within the agency to move towards working much more collaboratively with citizen science and using that alongside our monitoring and data as well.
Fantastic.
So I hope that develops. But
you get a sense it's growing, don't you? Bart have got their River Blitz in July.
Yeah.
And, there was a thing in the paper last week about citizen scientists, doing phosphate and nitrate checks and that kind of thing. So hopefully that's growing, begins to fill that gap a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I know we got involved with Bart was called the Yellow Fish Project.
Oh, yeah.
So basically what happened was we worked with Bart to highlight the fact that all surface water drains are pretty much linked, in the road, are pretty much linked to rivers. Most of them are linked to rivers and waterways. And that, you need to be really careful what you're pouring out your driveway or at the end of the road or wherever. And, a lot of the time people pour the most hideous things down, old cooking oil, petrol, fuel, diesel, antifreeze, all those sorts of things can just find their way through those surface water drains into the river. So we worked with the team at Bart and, with permission, I might add, from the local council, sprayed environmentally friendly yellow chalk paint in the shape of a fish around those drains and did a leaflet drop campaign to let people know. I think it was in the Yate area and where was it? Yate and on a couple of areas on the River Froome, just to let people know residentially that actually, hey, these things do link to rivers. Be careful what you're pouring down them. And those little yellow fish, they just washed off in the rain eventually.
Yeah.
But it was a visual connection to get people to work. So that's been a real success.
Yes.
And something that's really worked out. So
Excellent. So this episode's been all about fishing Netham Weir on the Avon, which is part of the tidal Avon down at the bottom in the city of Bristol.
Yeah.
And while we were there on high tide, a shoal and mullet came up. So they must have come in, I guess, from Severn Estuary all the way up the Avon. And Pete caught a little school bass, amazingly.
Fantastic.
Two estuarial but also sea fish.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the city of Bristol.
Yeah.
And there was an article in the Evening Post a couple of years ago where someone spotted porpoises underneath the Clifton Suspension Bridge, presumably chasing up a shoal and mullet or bass or maybe possibly sea trout. Mm-hmm. And I know you're a keen bass fisherman.
I am. Yeah.
So
that's not
the prospect of catching a bass in the Avon in Bristol.
Yeah, I like the sound of it. Yeah, I mean a lot of big bass are caught, fairly far up rivers,
Yeah. They seem to be able to tolerate fresh water.
Flounder? Any flounder there?
We didn't. I'm sure they're
usually
flounder.
a classic one.
I'm sure they must be there. Yeah. But obviously we were there to try and, because our search in the Fishstolian is for brown trout and sea trout, basically the same creature. But, I've got a book on the Bristol Avon as a fishery, an old book from the 1980s, and there are references to sea trout being caught up the Bristol Avon. There was a couple of really big ones caught in Keynsham Park in the 1980s, and there's several other examples. and also salmon. I mean, Bart recently did a eDNA test of the water at Keynsham and found salmon DNA in the Avon. So what might be what is it about the Avon that it isn't like the Dorset Avon? Where you get a proper run of salmon, you get a really good run of sea trout down there. I know because I fish for them.
Yeah.
What is it about the Bristol Avon that perhaps puts those fish off from running and spawning there?
Again, this is what hundreds of years of historical modification of river channels does: over widening, culverting, the impact of industry, streams of change for agriculture. Those spawning tributaries are destroyed or covered over, or silted up. And those gravels just aren't able to produce juvenile salmonids anymore. Chuck in a couple of dozen barriers, and it's no wonder that those fish are just not finding their way to where they're going to be. So you would have to undo hundreds of years of modification in order to make it easier for those fish to move up and into the city. But then that would have to be done in a combination of, like I said before, improving and reconnecting tributaries like the Trim, the Mells, the Chew, the Bybrook, and improving those habitats as well and reconnecting them. I'm sure they've all got impoundments on them as well. So you're talking about millions of pounds of investment in order to do that.
Yeah, and in these cash-strapped times, it's quite hard to make that argument, isn't it?
I mean,
the flip side of that is to think of those Atlantic salmon who've been all the way over to Greenland, made it back. However many of them there are trying to get back up and trying to keep that little population going.
Yeah,
it's heartbreaking, really. But what can you do? You'd hope that somehow, like you say, incrementally, you can make small differences, which ultimately will at least keep them hanging on.
I think, yeah. You like going back to what you said, doing what you can where you can. Just because there's a major impoundment downstream, if you've got some small ones that you feel you could tackle through a smaller organisation, then why not? Why not try and engage with Bristol and Avon Rivers Trusts or your local Environment Agency officers and have that conversation? We are talking about we're up against massive odds, and particularly in big urban sprawls like Bristol, where there are a multitude of different problems. But money is all down to funding and money, and I think at the Environment Agency we're always unfortunately forced to do more with less, and I think on the whole, through my experience, we do the best we can with that. We spread the money. We've got the Fisheries Improvement Fund, which is a very straightforward bit of funding that I know Wild Trout Trust have worked with and other fishing clubs have worked with, which is incredibly useful, benefits fishing clubs in a number of different ways, not just trout fishing, clubs, of course, fishing clubs as well, fishing lakes and all that kind of stuff. So we've just got to carry on doing what we can. Just don't lose hope. It's about also remember. And I heard somebody say they interviewed a scientist on Radio 4 on Jim Al-Khalili's show recently, and he was really positive. And he said, "Look, although we've lost so much, it's pretty grim, dark times. You've got to remember that we've got to protect what we've got, and stop it slipping even further. Keep that above your head, and keep that, protect what we've got and improve what we've got."
And I don't know if it's just the social media that I follow or the papers that I read, but I'm sensing the public are getting to that stage where
100%.
they're thinking, hang on a second, even today there was statistic out that we've lost 70% of our natural biodiversity as a planet, and at some point hopefully soon we're going to say enough, and fortunately, as a lover of trout, as Dan Osmond said on a previous podcast, if there was a nuclear winter, cockroaches and brown trout would be left over. So they're pretty tough.
They are incredibly tough. They're real survivors, and you see them in urban settings in Bristol, and and I've seen them, in other towns and cities as well. I mean, the Wandles are a really good example, where they have, because of the activities of the Wandle Trust, Theo and all the guys and girls up there, they've really done an amazing thing there, to keep trout alive in a city, London. And so we can't lose hope. We've got those little bits to cling on to and to use as examples and inspiration for the future. And we've just got to think of clever, inclusive, innovative ways to draw people in to conservation. And hey, that might not just be through fishing. That might be through other avenues. One of my big bugbears personally is people's access to rivers. It can't just be fishermen. It's got to be other people as well. Other people are allowed to look at rivers. We know we've got these. I'm probably going this is dodgy ground now, but we've got lots of private stretches. But actually, it would be nice to see fishing clubs starting to think out of the box. A little bit outside of the box, should I say, and saying, maybe we might let some other members in who might just want to come down and on a certain day or an afternoon come and look at the river or go for a swim or what have you,
Well, I think with that call to arms, Luke, and on a positive note, that's probably a good point to turn the mic off and tuck into the crumble that I can smell wafting through from the kitchen. The fire's roaring, and it's just been brilliant to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And there's an awful lot to deal with, but I think there's an awful lot that we can be positive about, and move forward with our rivers.
Absolutely.
So, John, that was the Netham Weir. That was a very interesting morning. I think I ended up on 6 or 7.
Yeah.
One little schoolie.
Yep.
Schoolie bass, and the rest chub. Didn't see anything bigger. The float was bobbing and dipping, but it was all little small fish. There was nothing really committing and taking it down properly. So, we know there's juniors in there.
Yeah.
Surely there's got to be some big ones sometimes.
Nothing to make us think though that there was any trout necessarily. I don't think so anyway. I mean,
No.
You just said, are we going to give it another go? And I was thinking, well, if we'd had some kind of hint that there might be one there,
Yeah.
then maybe it would be worth it. But there's nothing really.
No. I saw a few fish, but they were all small and little coarse fish, I think.
Yeah.
We haven't seen anything jump like a trout or make rise like a trout. It doesn't look bad habitat, but
No.
just good to get some fish.
Yeah, definitely.
Shame there weren't some wild browns involved.
Yeah. I did have a tap on the fly.
Yeah.
Didn't actually, land anything, but
No.
I think it was the maggots win the day on this one.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was it's not our 4th river.
No.
It's about 6th.
Yeah. 4th episode.
Yeah. So what an interesting thing to do. I've got to know Bristol a lot better, I must say.
Yeah. So I think for both of us, it's becoming, although we really love our fishing, I think the habitat and keep conserving the habitat is becoming equally important. And actually really getting down into it, we were saying a bit earlier that actually being on the weir and seeing some of the beauty up close. It's a man-made structure, but the way nature's kind of come in and made it its own. It's incredible, isn't it? And actually being up close to that makes you want to look after it even more.
It does. It's a work of the Wild Trout Trust.
Yep.
And in our patch, Bristol Avon Rivers Trust.
Yep.
Really worthwhile. The great things they're doing, and they're not just doing hands-on stuff, but they're doing a bit of education in classrooms and stuff, and that's so important.
Yep. And then right on the kind of sharp edge too, organisations like Fish Legal in the Angling Trust, who are holding polluters to account.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately the Environment Agency just doesn't have the funds to do that properly. I think the rivers need eyes and ears, and we're hoping that anybody who's listened to this, keep your eye out on your local river.
Yeah.
If you see any pollution,
do report it.
Yeah, ring up your local water company and let them know.
Yeah.
Certainly Wessex Water are fairly responsive when we
they're
do
very
that.
responsive. Yeah.
So we hope you've enjoyed the Fishstolian. We've certainly had a lot of fun making it. I don't know what we're going to do next, Pete. Probably a bit of fishing somewhere.
Probably. I've got some appointments with the tanks lined up.
Okay. We'll hang on to the mic, and if we see something else that excites us, we'll maybe have another go. But for the time being, thanks for listening. And keep an eye out for your local river.
Yay. Well done, John. Cheers.
Cheers, Pete.
Everyone.